Hey, Nick. Hey, listeners.
Hello, Warwick. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to yet another episode where I crack you up with my fantastic joke.
It's such a great way to start an episode of just laughing uncontrollably at your amazing jokes, Nick.
I think we set the bar pretty low and it's all uphill from here. But anyway, let's go. I'll give it a crack.
Righto. What do you got for us today?
What's the difference between a hippo and a Zippo?
No.
One is really heavy and one is a little lighter.
Oh, I hope everyone knows what a Zippo actually is.
Oh, come on.
Not
I'm not that old.
non-smokers might not know though, Nick.
Well, vapors may not know. You may be onto something there.
True. And look, some people carry Zippos just for lighting a random fire, although that's another topic we don't want to talk about. So that's probably an appropriate segue into introducing our guest who's here going, oh, don't know what the go is with this podcast. But Deborah from Safe Track, welcome to the Tradies in Business podcast.
Thank you.
So
I'm not sure I can follow that up with an equally funny joke, so I'll leave it to you guys to leave that to do
I
that.
know it's a
Thanks,
tough act to
Deborah.
follow. It's a tough act to follow. One day we're going to get a real professional comedian on here and show us how it's actually done.
Then I'll actually prepare and I'll still nail it. It'll be fine.
All right. Now, Deborah, our listeners love to know about the people that we talk to. So I'm going to ask you a very question. Who are you, Deborah?
Yeah, it's a very esoteric question, isn't it? In my work life, I run a compliance training business. In my personal life, I run a family of two medium-aged teenagers that so far haven't set anything on fire. So I'm looking at that as a win.
They don't have Zippos in their sock drawer.
No Zippos in the house. And no vapes to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
Nice.
Nice. It's not a bad segue into the topic of our conversation today on this episode. And speaking of teenage kids and knowledge of their behavior, is talking about, well, compliance and also training and having people behave in a way that's in line with social requirements, business requirements, legislative requirements, and how on earth we get that to happen. So that's a big part of, well, that is your business by the sounds of it, Deborah. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, every business, just like every human, is required to adhere by the law. And understanding the vast myriad of laws that apply to our workplace is actually pretty difficult. And as business owners, we've got to make sure that we're aware of them and that our staff and ourselves are adhering to them. And how we get our head around all those vast bits of legislation in a simple, easy to understand manner is a pretty big undertaking for a business owner.
How on earth are we supposed to do that? I used to work in finance and accounting, and they have massive pieces of legislation and many departments that you have to deal with. But the overwhelming or the overarching principle is that ignorance is no defense. And so there's this expectation that you will just go and educate yourself about every single thing you need to know about as a business owner. How are people expected to do that these days?
Yeah, look, I think especially from a small business owner's point of view, or any business owner, they really have to assess risks in their workplace is one of the first things that you need to look at. You need to say, where are my risks and how am I going to mitigate those risks? And if I'm working in a manual environment, for example, I've probably got pretty high health and safety risks. So I need to look at what they are and how I could mitigate them. And so it's really important that I understand if I work at heights, I need to do a lot of work on figuring out what the laws are and what I need to do to be safe at a height, because that's a significant risk for me. So a large part as a business person comes down to what are my risks and how am I going to mitigate them? And training in a specific area or a specific range of areas that apply to your business is really critical to you ensuring you operate your business in compliance with the laws.
I don't know that I necessarily even know where to start to look for this kind of information, Deborah. It can be really overwhelming, as Warwick's alluding to first understand what the obligations are as a business owner and what I'm meant to know, and then where on earth do I even find the information for me to be able to adhere to it. Clearly, that's one of the things that you address with the business that you have. But are there some areas that make it, or some government websites or something similar that can lead us down that path, at least help us understand the enormity of what it is that we need to be across?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there are some fabulous business resources, things like the Chamber of your state-based Chamber of Commerce usually has really great resources for businesses to get them up and running with a business and a general awareness. Also, things like industry partners, Master Builders Association, things like that, HIA, they do a range of educational sessions that can really help get people up to speed on a large range of topics. And then, yes, you can look to specialist providers like ourselves to provide training in specific topics once you're sort of aware of what your needs are. But I think, getting an overview from some of your industry authorities is a really good place to start, and understanding what your compliance requirements are in that, what are the laws, regulations that apply to your business, and what sort of training do you need to do to understand them?
So I think it's great as a business owner to be educated around those areas. Obviously, it's important. That's not up for debate. It's then how we distill that information to our team and ensure that they're adhering to any of our collective compliance obligations. How do you recommend that we do that from a business owner's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, again, you've got to assess what your learning audience is, the size of it, who you need to educate, what your risks are from that audience. And then from there, you need to go about distilling a solution. Now, that might be face-to-face sessions. It might be sending various people off to various seminars. It might be investing in online learning for various people, especially senior people, to ensure they understand their obligations. And there are, as you've indicated earlier, some really wonderful websites from each of the regulators that create really wonderful material that's available to end users. And I think the regulators in recent years, and I'm talking sort of WorkSafe, the Australian Human Rights Commission, have created really fabulous resources for businesses, especially small businesses, in being able to access information. And they've even created some training materials that you can access for free and without charge from those places.
It's really helpful. And we're all dealing with humans. And when we're trying to bring some of these principles into place within our businesses, it can be really challenging to get the humans to behave the way we would like them to behave, or at least follow the outline that we've put in place at the very minimum. How do we, as business owners, combat that issue of we're dealing with people and they behave in a way that fits with them and their own values and not necessarily our values or the values of the company?
Yeah, I mean, the human conduct risk is unsurprisingly the largest risk that all organisations face. So if there was a definitive answer on how to combat that, the person who came up with it would be worth an awful lot of money. So really what it's about is mitigating it to the greatest extent possible. So it's assessing those risks and controlling them to the greatest extent possible. So if that's human risk, and one of those ways to mitigate that risk is actually knowledge. Knowledge is an empowering thing. So ensuring that people understand what they can and can't do and what is and isn't within the bounds of the law, and ensuring that your organisation operates in an ethical manner with integrity that would withhold those standards is really important. It's when we start to let them slip and go, oh, that's okay, mate, don't worry about that. That's when behaviours it starts to form a cultural part of an organisation where we say poor behaviours will be accepted and tolerated here. It's okay to behave like that. So as much as it is about education, it's also about enforcement of standards. And I always say with compliance, it comes to the tone at the top sets the mood in the middle, which creates the buzz at the bottom. So how we operate as leaders, how we lead our businesses, and how ethically we operate our businesses, and what standards that we stand for ourselves are the standards that the people who work for you are going to follow. So lead by example, I would say, is the number one thing. When we see organisations with leaders that operate with integrity and with great ethics, it's unsurprising that the rest of the organisation usually follows, and the inverse is also the truth. So, that's where it starts.
I agree. Deborah, I've always found some of the languaging around these requirements to be a little grey and far from definitive around my responsibilities or how that is even ascertained should the worst thing happen. So I've had some site incidences as a builder where we've had some safety breaches or something has gone wrong and there's been investigations, so on and so forth. And a lot of the language around my obligations as the principal contractor are quite Well, they're great. They're very hard for me to always understand and hold a standard towards. Is there a way to have best practice in those areas where the languaging is quite grey?
Maybe I can't think of an example where a business
Okay.
leader, their obligation is grey. I think the work health and safety laws are very, very clear that as a business leader or owner, you are ultimately responsible for the work health and safety of your workers. If you're in charge of a PCBU, the buck stops with you. And they've even made it so clear now that not only are you potentially liable under the legislation, but you can be criminally liable as well. So you're talking about health and safety incidents that result in serious damage or death can result in the business owner or
100%.
operator going to jail. And that is unequivocal. So there is no grey area when it comes to responsibility under work health and safety laws. And there's really, really onerous responsibilities on business owners in relation to work health and safety. And so certainly in the construction industry, which has one of the biggest risks for work health and safety, it's absolutely empirical that as business owners and business operators, we understand that we are liable, we are responsible for the work health and safety of the people on our work sites, and that we ensure that we are knowledgeable on ensuring that we're mitigating risk, we're training in staff in what those risks are and how we're going to control those risks from actually materializing.
That's where human error gets in the way, I think. And that's where I find it gets, at least with understanding, a little ambiguous. From my point of view, I'm just a lolly builder trying to do what's necessary to run my company, to have my people come to work safely and go home safely. And yet, despite my best intentions, my best training, my best practical exclusion, even at times, we still deal with people making error. However, as a builder, I still am responsible for their error when they make their error. And I guess that's where it gets a little bit confusing. I recall an instance where a workplace health and safety officer was on site and told me, regardless, because I am the builder, I'm going to carry a percentage of responsibility for what happens, no matter what I do to mitigate that risk, no matter what stuff I put in place to mitigate that risk. There will still be a balance of that is applied to me as that contractor. And so I guess then it's like, well, if I've ticked all of the boxes and a human has still made an error, it's hard for me then to understand as a business owner, how do I mitigate the entire risk that is a human coming to work after a bad day, a bad night, hasn't slept well, or something that is unforeseen, and they make a silly mistake or just choose the wrong thing at that time that results in an injury to them.
Unfortunately, running a business, there are risks inherent in running a business. And as a business owner, we take on risks, and that's why and how we make money. When we charge somebody, we take on an inherent risk with that charge. We also have the ability to have contracts. We've got liability clauses, and we've got insurances to protect ourselves in the event that something does go wrong. So ensuring that we've got adequate insurances to cover events when they do occur is absolutely vital for a workplace. I mean, I agree with you. You can take every precaution necessary, but you can still have something that occurs. Now, what is important is if something does go wrong and your workplace is investigated and a regulator comes in and says, look, you've done absolutely everything you could have reasonably done. This was a pretty unforeseen risk, or, this person, for whatever reason, made a terrible mistake, but I can see that you trained this person here, here, and here. I can see that you had all the safety gear in place here, here, and here. I can see that you insisted on its use here, here, and here. So if you make sure that you have put in place the reasonable steps to mitigate yourself and to protect the worker wherever you possibly could, your risk of being found in breach of laws is going to be significantly lower than if you haven't done those things. So making sure that training staff is one of the things that a regulator will look to say, did you train your staff in these things? As that can be a mitigating factor in protecting your business should things go wrong. Unfortunately, that has become the large reason why people train. People train to mitigate in the event that something goes wrong, whereas training should be done with a more proactive thought process. It shouldn't be done to check a box to mitigate damage in case something goes wrong. It should be done to make sure nothing goes wrong in the first place. And that's why quality of training is really important, because you can roll out really crappy, horrible training that nobody understands, it doesn't do anything. Whereas you roll out quality training that people understand they can engage in, that's when your learners go, I understand. I understand what I can and can't do. And when they see a hazard or when they see something unsafe, they know what to do. They know to report this. They know to say, hey, I'm tired today. I don't feel well. I'm not climbing up that ladder. Hey, it's too windy today. I don't think it's safe. I'm not going on that roof. You know, if you've trained them the right way, they'll be able to recognize better and hopefully proactively prevent things from happening and prevent them from making poor mistakes.
So, Deborah, when it comes to training, like anything, I guess, as you've talked about, there's effective training and then there's probably less effective training.
Sorry, that wasn't a very polite word, was
it? I was going to say good training and bad training, but I didn't want to be quite so black and white about it. What are some of the aspects that make training perhaps more likely to achieve that outcome that you're talking about?
I think training that's on point and relevant and delivered at the right time. So if you're going to a work site and you're trained 3 months before you go on that work site, I can guarantee you would have forgotten that by the time you get on that work site. So just in time training, you know, if you're going to a work site, what's going to be on this site? What do you need to watch out for? What are the hazards here? What are the things that we need to be aware of? What's the weather conditions like today? The things that are relevant to that particular site are going to be really, really important. I mean, I'm giving examples from a worksite health and safety perspective, but things that engage a learner is really important. Sitting up and watching a video that's not engaging the learner in any way isn't the best way to train people. Ideally, we want to ask questions. We want to use them for them to give them some information and to get them to apply that information. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of information here. Now I'm going to ask you to apply it. So that's the best sort of training, when we can get the learner to apply what they've learned and shown us that they understand that content. That way, when you use content, you remember content. Our brains are pretty clever things. And if we're told something and we don't utilize that information, we just chuck it out really, really quickly. Remember those days when we all used to remember phone numbers because we used to use them all the time? Now we don't remember phone numbers anymore because our phone remembers them for us. It's not that we've got dumber. It's that our brains are incredibly smart and our brains go, we don't actually need to remember this information anymore. I'm not going to remember it. So if your brain doesn't think you're going to use information, it doesn't remember it anymore. So utilizing the information that you've used that you've learned is really, really important to its retention. So I'm going to tell you something and we're going to use it. So actually, you know, online training can be great because you can build interactions into those training materials to ensure that they're utilizing that knowledge, but equally so can face-to-face training. So there's multiple different methods of training staff, all of which can be effective, but I would say engaging in interactive training is the best way to ensure that you're going to get better learner outcomes.
Does that work, Deborah, for all learning types, given that, you know, some of us can sit and listen to something and we pick it all up and we're able to utilize it. Some of us need to see it demonstrated to us, so on and so forth. Does that kind of principle that you're talking about there work for all learning types?
Yeah, one of the things I really like about well-constructed online learning training is that you can have visual, audio, and doing. So you can actually cover all learning types in a particular course. So online learning can be the most effective because you're actually covering all types of learners, as can a really good face-to-face session. But a face-to-face session where you're sitting down listening to someone lecture you for 5 hours is probably as ineffective as sitting watching a video for 5 hours. So, yeah. Your millennial audience is a really interesting one because you've got a really new generation of learner. And we know the new generation of learner is not great with listening or learning for more than 7 minutes at a time. So 4 years ago, it was 10 minutes. It's now gone down to 7 minutes. And the other day I heard it's now down to 5 to 3 minutes. So our ability to pay attention and learn within a short space of time is reducing by the second and at a frightening pace. So the way we're delivering content and training needs to adjust if we want to interact with this learner audience. So, I mean, at SafeTrack, we've just launched what we call micro-learns, which are literally learning files broken up into little micro-learning sessions so you can do a little bit at a time. So, you know, this is the world that we operate in, Nic.
It's fascinating to me. You identified that you're a mum of teenagers. I've got several. I've got lots of kids, but they're all adults now, and I can recall a moment in which they were teenagers, they were gamers, and I walked into the room, spoke to one of my children. Now, he was gaming, so he was playing a game. He was verbally interacting with the people he's playing the game with. He had different music on in the background and another screen doing something else, and totally listened to everything I said and was able to practically give me an answer. It just blows me away the way brains are adapting in our youth. And I think that must pose a problem to all of us that are trying to educate and train anybody as they work their way through, particularly the younger generations. How do you, as a training organization or somebody who's delving in that area of education, how do you stay abreast of new learning techniques so that we're able to be impactful with that education when we deliver it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really is constantly evolving. So we spend a lot of time traveling, going to conferences. Actually, there's some really wonderful learning conferences that are held in the States annually, and we ensure we send a couple of people every year so that we are up to date with the latest standards and what's going on, latest technologies, where learning's moving. Microlearns is the big trend at the moment. We're certainly jumping on the back of that. But it's evolving at a very, very fast pace. And it's really important that we're adapting so that we can continue to educate our new generations of learners. At the same time, we've still got to educate our older generation of learners too.
Yeah.
So we're really in a space of quite extreme needs between learner audiences. So it's important, if we're working with a training organisation, we can adapt what it is that we're delivering to the learner audience. We've got workplaces now that will deliver certain training to this audience and another format to a different type of learner audience. We've got others where they can choose their own. So yeah, it's about the ability to adapt and change to the needs and to be able to do it quickly and nimbly, I think.
Yeah.
I saw a funny post today from somebody that basically said they went to the library to study for a course they're doing, but they spent the whole session learning about how to study better and haven't done any study yet. It's like one of these endless loops where it's a picture of a picture of a picture. And so you have to learn how to learn, so then you can learn how to train others in how to learn. And it just becomes so overwhelming that I think a lot of people don't do anything about it. They just become paralyzed with, how the heck do I proceed with all of this? And I know we've talked about that a lot in the episode today of why it's important. And I think the how then gets a lot of people bogged, because even as you start talking about micro learnings, I'm sitting here thinking, holy crap, this episode is like half an hour. No one's going to listen to this whole thing. And oh my gosh, what about all of our content here at Tradies in Business? Like, everything is more than 5 minutes, and I can't say anything in less than 3. So I'm completely stuffed. I need to go back to uni so I can learn how to communicate in 30-second sound bites.
They all talk now in this very clipped language. I can't understand most things my 14-year-old son says. We don't use consonants anymore, and we're dropping, letters off words all over the place. So we're just shortening. We don't even say yes anymore. We say yay.
Yes.
Y-E. And then just Y.
We don't even say brother or sister. It's bro.
Just bro. I'm not mum, by the way. I am bro. Just so you know.
You've made it then, Deborah. All right. So, look, we could wax lyrical. Well, I could actually wax lyrical. I've just proved that. Deborah, do you have like a top 3 places to start for people? Or, I mean, you obviously work with clients in this space. Where do you start with people who are like, okay, I know I got to do some stuff. I have no idea how to start, where to start, etc. Is there a few keys that people could actually get started with?
I would, as I would say, I would go to your industry body, whichever that industry body is. And there's heaps of them, regardless of your trade or your area. There is an industry body that will set out some really great beginner materials. So I would start there. And then once I had an idea of what I didn't know, I would then go in to start trying to educate myself on those areas better, probably by going to the regulator websites, WorkSafe, things like that. doing some reading of your own. As business leaders, I think we need to do that.
Mm.
Once we've got an idea of what it is we don't know and how much we need to know, then it's when you can start to look at, well, how do I upskill myself in this area, and what I need to do? And look, our business is one, but there's multiple training organisations around that deliver either face-to-face or online, and it doesn't really matter how you do it, you just need to do it.
Awesome tips. I'm sitting here just feeling like, wow, I think even we need to do training on training, Nicole.
Everything gets presented in a real format. They've got about 90 seconds that we can hold their attention for, and we're good to go. And I totally see things moving that way. It's just one point at a time that's digested, then acted upon. For somebody, well, the younger generation, I really feel like social media is training their brains that way. The other thing I saw, this might blow you away, Deborah, or perhaps you've observed it with your own kids. My nephew has a podcast, and he was utilizing our family chat to ask how to get more views onto the podcast. This is going to blow Warwick away. And one of the kids came through with a tip that you can split screen with your social media shares. So the top screen is the podcast and the bottom screen is a video game. And so the kids get sucked in. I say kids, his audience is 25 and under. They're literally sucked into watching that video game, yet they're still digesting the content that's coming in their ears. Very much goes back to that story I shared about my child. And I wonder how long until we start to see the adaptation of some of that stuff in the way we're learning, particularly once we finish school. It'll be certainly a very interesting ride. And Deborah, I am so very pleased that I am not in your position. That sounds like one heck of a challenge.
Well, maybe the next step for us will be to create a game with some training overlay on the split screen.
First person safety game, not a first person other game.
Oh, I don't mind that idea, actually. Even I might.
wonder if we can do that with business coaching. I think it's just going to be boring no matter which. We couldn't gamify it if we wanted to.
I don't know, but you've set a challenge now. I'm going to start thinking about how to gamify business coaching.
Yeah. Deborah, if people want to find out more about you and what you do, what's the best place for them to do that other than on the game that you're
Tinder?
about to release?
No, that's a joke. Safe Track, you can edit that out, by the way.
No, that's in.
I'm not on Tinder. It's safetrack.com.au, or if anyone wants to connect professionally, I'm on LinkedIn and happy to accept connections or questions that way also.
Nice work. All right. Well, thanks, Deborah, for your time. You've definitely exploded my brain. And I'm sure many of our listeners are thinking, right, I thought I had all this compliance stuff sorted, but it's back to the drawing board. So definitely go and check Deborah out and SafeTrack. Thanks for your time, Deborah. It's been great.
Awesome. Thanks very much for your time. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thanks.